Here live on a Thursday. Sam is up in Minnesota getting set for day 2 of joint practices for Titans and Vikings. And we've got Dave Kempfert here, the lead physical therapist at the Bone and Joint Institute in Franklin. boneandjointtn.org is their website. Everybody loves the DocTalk segments. And whenever an injury happens with the Titans or the Vols, with the Preds, something that impacts us locally here in the Nashville media market, we can turn to our experts with the Bone and Joint Institute. Again, boneandjointtn.org. Whenever an injury happens in life to you, someone you love, son, daughter, that's where you need to turn to help get you back to health. So, Dave, welcome in. Hope your summer's been good. It's training camp season, which means injury season, but I hope everything's good on your side.
Yeah, it's been good. It was a good summer. Hope the same for you guys. And if we're talking again, it means it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? It's ball season.
That's true. That's true.
That's right. Football season. Former NFL offensive lineman, college offensive lineman, Dave over there running the physical therapy at the Bone and Joint Institute. So Sam was at practice in Minnesota the first day of 2 days with Titans Vikings joint practices, and Treylon Burks goes down. Everybody freaks out. The social media goes ablaze. We've got the play. We'll show that here in a moment. But Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network did have this in the afternoon on Wednesday that Treylon Burks suffered an LCL sprain during practice on Wednesday. Sources say after the MRI. This is good news as Burks should only miss a few weeks. A scare, but a solid result considering. And that result is this play that we'll show here before we dive into what this injury is. But here is the Burks injury from a fan up there in Minnesota.
Yeah, never a good sight to see out there, guys. It's always a little scary when you see that happen out there.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like a little bit of a, I don't know, like a hyperextension, almost like he got a little straight legged as he was trying to catch his weight. And Dave, I saw him getting carted off the field, holding what looked like the back of his leg to me, almost like under his calf. And so there was a lot of speculation going out. Could this possibly be? We hear LCL from Ian Rappaport, and everybody knows the ACL. They know the MCL. They know meniscus, but LCL is not really one that you hear a lot of injuries to or discuss. So what is the LCL and where is it on the knee? Does it make sense that Treylon's holding the back part of his leg there with that diagnosis?
Yeah, no, so the LCL is the lateral collateral ligament. Most people, have heard more of the MCL. That's the one that's injured more of the medial collateral ligament or the inside ligament. So this is a ligament. It's smaller. It's not as broad of a ligament that kind of helps stabilize the outside of the knee. So if you ever want to find it on yourself, and people at home can do this while they're listening, I guess, but if you cross your leg over where your foot is crossed over at the knee and you run your finger along the outside of your joint line, it'll almost feel like a small little pencil there. And so that would be your LCL. So that gives you kind of an idea of where to find it on yourself. But it's basically a stabilizer of the outside part of your knee from several different forces, including rotational forces. And it runs basically from the fibula, or that smaller leg bone that's on the outside of your lower leg. It runs from that up into the outside part of your femur or your thigh bone. So that's kind of the location and kind of where that's at. It's part of a complex of other structures. So when you'd asked about him grabbing the back of the knee, it's part of a complex of other structures of muscle tendons and ligaments that help stabilize the outside and posterior part. So a lot of times when people hurt, that they'll feel that in that area. And so a lot of times you'll see them grab that outside, but sometimes it'll look like they're grabbing the back as well.
Interesting. So an LCL sprain. So let's kind of go down to the basics. When we're talking about sprains of any type, kind of describe what that injury is when we hear the word sprain.
Sure. So most of us hear sprains when we're talking about ankles. That's kind of the most common thing that we'll hear. So there's varying degrees of sprains. So a sprain is basically an overstretching, and as they become worse, they become actually a partial tearing or can even be a full rupture. Sounds like this is one of the lighter end ones, which we're all happy for him and the team, of course. But a grade 1 sprain is more of an overstretching. Usually there's not a lot of swelling. There's definitely pain. There could be a little bit of deviation with gait and and discomfort with movement and those type of things at first. But luckily, those usually are the things that recover in the first 2 to 4 weeks type of a range, right? There's always a little bit of variation there. If you get a grade 2 sprain, that means there's actually more than just an overstretching and some laxity in it. There's probably some partial tearing. You'll see a little bit more aggressive pain symptoms. You'll see a little more limited function. It's considerable loss of function at times. And that's where you're seeing guys, they're definitely braced up. They're definitely on crutches. You might do it with a grade 1 sprain as well, just to kind of protect it a little bit and help people recover a little faster. Grade 3s are your more serious. That's where there's actually a rupture, tearing. And so sometimes those are the ones that are the worst case scenarios where it leads to surgery.
What's the difference in sprain and strain?
So sprain refers more to the ligament. So this is a ligament that connects bone to bone. And so when we talk about a sprain of the ankle or the knee, we're talking about ligaments that connect bone to bone. When we hear strain, that's more muscles and muscle tendons. So when you hear the strain sprain, it's easy to get confused. But that involves more of the muscular side of things and the tendon where the muscle attaches to the bone. There's definitely overlap, right? Very few things happen in isolation. So it's not unusual, especially because the calf muscle, the lateral or outside calf muscle crosses the back of the knee on that outside. One of your long hamstring muscles on the outside crosses that same area. So it's not unusual for guys to get a small little muscular strain as well as the sprain of the ligament at the same time. The good thing is, when we hear ACLs, a lot of time they're always paired with something else. Like, they happen in isolation as well, but a lot of time there's a meniscus injury or it's an ACL, MCL, and meniscus tear, those type of things. The good thing is most LCL injuries do happen with some in a little bit more isolation at times. But they definitely can involve other structures. But it sounds like, from what we're hearing, this is going to be on the lighter side of things, which is great.
So when you hear that it's a sprain to that ligament and you watch the play, how do you feel like this happened? Is it that straight leg kind of thing that you see at the end of that video? So it's overstretching of the leg as he's trying to slow himself down?
Yeah, and you can tell in that video, it was a great explanation about you, Sam, as you can see, he was almost kind of catching up to his body weight. And so it looked like his leg was really reaching out in front, trying to decelerate. Most of the time, these injuries, we see them most in football. We'll see them a lot in soccer and contact sports and those type of things. And we'll also see it in skiers a lot. But most of the time when it's a contact injury, the femur bone comes down and meets the lower leg bone, and you'll get hit on the inside of your knee. And so if you get hit on the inside of the knee, it'll gap the outside. And that's where that LCL runs, is that outside. So it'll overstretch it that way. If it's a non-contact injury, we'll usually see it with a really hard cut or a sudden start-stop type of a thing, or a hyperextension injury, which it looks like from the video. That's probably what happened here, is that he got a little bit of hyperextension. There's a rotary component. It controls a little bit of rotation of the leg, as well as just keeping it from kind of opening up on the outside. So when he hyperextended, he could add a little rotation there as well that kind of added to the pressure on the LCL at that time.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense there. And so Ian Rappaport says 3 weeks, right? And we're sitting here, the injury happens 25 days away from week 1 when the Titans go down to the Saints. So that's a little bit over 3 weeks. And you kind of mentioned grade 1, 2 to 4, grade 2, a little bit more severe. But as a physical therapist, when you have a guy like Treylon Burks, big body, explosive receiver, what would be a plan for rehab to make sure that you can get this guy back the right way and in a time efficient way too?
Yeah. So it's the interesting thing with athletes is because they're so big and strong, they generate a lot more force, and they're obviously doing things that most of us aren't out there just doing on the weekend. So you always have to think about that. But the good thing is you're working with a little better raw materials than most of us have. So when it comes to healing and stuff like that, you have your advantages and disadvantages. They're generating more forces in a very violent kind of game. But they also are usually a lot better shape and muscular strength and things like that. They're doing really well. The first thing with this is usually, and people will be scared when they see this, but a lot of times you'll still brace somebody. The LCL is actually tight when your knee's in extension. And so what happens is you sprain it, it gets sore, it gets swollen. People want to kind of keep it partially bent because that puts it on laxity and a little bit of slack, and it makes it feel better. But then you also start losing your quad strength, and you also start ending up with, a little contracture. Your knee is staying bent when you really don't want it to. So it's not unusual to see these guys kind of braced out in extension at first, even if it's just a short period of time until they start making sure that everything looks good. That also gives them a little bit of a rest period on it and allows it to just kind of heal naturally. Initially, once you get that
real quick, sorry, would that be like an immobilizer to where like you want it to be like full out like extension to kind of keep it there so it doesn't kind of cramp up a little?
Yeah, and sometimes they'll put you in a knee brace, but if it's a grade 1, it really just depends on his symptoms and what his range of motion is like. If he's got good terminal knee extension, which happens a lot with grade 1, you'll be able to get your knee straight. You don't necessarily need to be braced. If he's having a lot of discomfort, they may brace him partially part of the day, right? Just to make sure he's just getting a little bit of rest. But initially you work on extension. You do the things to control the pain and the swelling and things like that. You don't ice these usually too long. If you don't see a lot of swelling, you actually want to increase blood flow to this and speed the body's rate of healing to that ligament. Muscles and tendons and things like muscles get a lot of blood supply. Ligaments don't get as much. So you want to actually increase heat and movement to kind of help your body's natural healing processes get going. You'll definitely start on a lot of, more non-weight bearing things, depending on how his pain is and his function. You'll start on just a lot of like core strengthening, a lot of multi-directional hip strengthening, all these things that he's going to need later when he gets more active again, and a lot of quad and hamstring, just everything you can to support the inside, outside, back in front of that knee. The progression after that is more, normal daily activities, right? How's he doing with just stepping up onto 6 to 8 inch surfaces? How's he doing with balancing on one leg? And then you move from kind of static balances where you're still to dynamic things. How's this control of the roll of his thigh in and out? If he's, somebody has a lot of laxity, they'll feel a little bit unstable in their knee, and that'll kind of freak them out a little bit. And so you want to make sure that they're showing good stability with all their single leg activity as well. After that, it's kind of a nice progression back into more strengthening. So you're actually getting on more resistance, more strength, incorporating multi-directional movements with double leg and single leg. That goes well. Then you start working into some of your plyometric things. Again, light agility. Most of the time, because it's more of a lateral knee injury, it has a lot more to do with your control of your knee and what we call the frontal plane, or that side to side. So linear athletes won't notice as much. So you'll walk and you'll go up and down stairs sometimes and do really well, but it's that first kind of cutting, planting, where your knee gets these kind of side to side forces on it that people will notice. And emotionally, it brings on a little anxiety when you start to feel that at first. So you got to get guys over the mental part of the injury as well, and remind them, hey, you're going to be fine. It's normal to feel like that. It's a little overstretched, but it's healing. It's tightening up every day. And then doing the exercises gradually into more sports specific stuff, and just making sure that he doesn't feel instability. We're not seeing any increased swelling. Hopefully this one occurred in pretty relative isolation, we're hoping. If not, if it did get some muscles and some tendons and things like that, those are luckily the things that heal a little faster as well. So it's a gradual progression from there back into more sports specific activity.
You mentioned kind of that mental side of like recovering from something like this, especially for a wide receiver who relies so much on, explosive movement, putting their foot in the ground and those types of movements. So like, what kind of limitations or concerns is there about wide receiver specific activity getting back on the football field, knowing that you want to avoid re-injury and want to make sure that a guy's really good to go?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is, like you said, like a linear athlete. One thing is one thing, but with the cutting, the aggressive cutting, planning, those type of things, reacting to the ball, all those things, that's a tough part about this being a wide receiver position. The good thing is that wide receivers versus like a defensive backs are always in reaction mode, right? So you're constantly, reacting. So at least the nice thing with wide receiver position is not that you're not going to have to react and make adjustments, of course, but you do have a little bit more of that, be able to pre-plan your activities. And so technically with those people, because they can pre-plan, they feel a little bit better about, hey, I know my route, I know my assignment, I know where I'm going. So they feel a little bit more confident in getting back because they can control some of their motion, even when it's not going full practice, full speed. Yeah. But definitely the stopping, sudden start, stops, cuts, those are the things that he's really going to have to prove to the rehab team that he's doing well. He's going to have to prove it to himself mentally, so that way he can go back out there, hopefully before that opener, or right at that opener, and get back to doing what he loves doing and not have any of that kind of hesitancy. He's going to feel real solid and strong and perform like he wants to.
You said that's normal though, right? Like, so a player, athlete, whoever with this injury might have this mental block of like, whoa, that doesn't feel right, but it's supposed to feel like that. And it's about, making sure they're comfortable enough knowing that the healing process is going how it should.
Yeah. And we do that a lot with non-athletes as well. But people who are relying on their body, obviously for their job, that's a big portion. It creates a little bit more anxiety for them than some guy just being able to go back to doing his normal, workouts and things like that. So those guys, they want to perform. They're athletes. They want to get out there, do everything they can. So a lot of reassurance at the start of this is like, hey, you're healing. Yes, there's a process. If we pass this, and this, then you get to go to the next phase. And then that really kind of builds their courage a little bit as going into activity, but it builds their confidence obviously as well. And saying, hey, this is what's going to happen. And then when they start to see that happen, then they start to buy into the rehab staff saying, hey, I'm going to be all right. Everything they said that's going to happen and the timelines they've been giving me are roughly the same. And that helps them kind of get back and feel good about going back to what they love.
Do you see athletes wearing braces on their knees when they get back into action, or is it typically you ditch the brace and you're okay?
Yeah, it really kind of depends on the evaluation.
Yeah.
Most guys will go back at least for a part-time because obviously we're pushing timelines here. We want to get them back. So a lot of guys will go back and they'll wear like a stabilization brace. So that way, if they were to take a shot to the knee or they take a little bit of harder cut, they got a little bit of support on that outside of that knee versus just what maybe the LCL is up to at that time. Again, if it's a grade 2 type of those, and they're saying, luckily this didn't sound like that. Those sometimes can be a 6 to 10 week kind of before they really start feeling good. But these grade 1s, a lot of times 2 weeks, some guys feel great. Other guys, it takes a little bit longer to get back. But 2 to 4 is usually a great window as far as our first guesstimates anyway.
So 25 days from week 1. That means 32 days away from the home opener, week 2 against the Chargers. So we know it's left LCL. What's the hardest type of route or the hardest cut to make with that LCL sprain? Is it inside, towards his right, or outside towards his left? What would you think there?
So if we think about what that protects against, so if this is the femur and this is the tibia on the bottom, if that LCL is running on this side, it's anything that would open this side up. So a lot of times you're going to be running towards your left and then having to cut right. If your knee dives outward, then that would strain that LCL a little bit. And so a lot of times it's anything that would kind of gap. Now, again, there's some other structures in there that work with your ACL. And so if your ACL is a little weak, you're might rely on some of those other structures to kind of help you out a little bit too. So it's not unusual for just any kind of like quick rotations or sudden starts and stops to be a little bit tough at first too. But definitely the things, the longer kind of routes where you can predict and make adjustments slowly, those are going to go probably very well for him early on. And they may hold back on certain types of routes in practice and stuff until he feels like those easier routes go well. And then the hard cuts, plants, outs, those kind of things, those are the things that you're going to, probably see him go back to last in practice before they cut him loose.
Interesting. Good. This is great. I love this stuff. I'm glad it's just an LCL sprain for Treylon Burks. It could have been a lot worse, as we've talked about the last 24 hours or so. But Dave, great stuff as always educational. So looking forward to seeing how the Titans wide receiver comes in his rehab, and we'll be counting down the days to see if he can make it out there against the Saints. But always awesome with the DocTalk segments with the Bone and Joint Institute in Franklin. So whenever you have an injury, maybe you don't need surgery, but you can go see our guy Dave, and he can get you back to what you need to be doing in regular life. But Dave, thanks as always. Hope you have a great rest of the week, and check him out, boneandjointtn.org. Thanks everybody for watching.
Thanks, guys.